There are many smart Death Note characters, and one of the smartest, undoubtedly, is Nier. But just how smart is he? He was the one who beat Light Yagami at the end. However, was he as smart as Light or L? Should he have won? Did it make any sense? Starting off, when we first see him, he presents himself as obviously being quite smart, like the successor to L, and a better successor to L than Mello, I would argue. He suspected Light pretty fast, but the groundwork had already kind of been laid out for him by L. Even with this though, the story didn't make complete sense because Miyakami was the one who made the mistake that ended up getting Light caught, and his plan wasn't that good. It would have made much more sense for Light to win based on what we've seen from his character, either Miyakami writing their names on a paper he had kept from the Death Note, or them finding out that the notebook was replaced. Just something going in Light's favor much more likely would have happened. We can see that Nier is smarter than Mello. He's a much better thinker and detective. Mello is quite smart himself, but he's not as smart as Nier. One thing about Nier that is very similar to L is that they're instantly like Light's enemy, suspecting Light, focused on Light, both pretty unemotional. Even Light had mentioned that he knew Nier was going to look over things that L would have never looked over, and which Nier did end up looking over, which Light said meant that was because Nier was not as smart as L. And no, it doesn't seem. He wasn't as good as a thinker. He didn't have as good awareness. Light had proved himself so much more than Nier with all the things he's pulled off. Same with L. And from the starting point of what L had to work with, how he kept suspecting Light as Kira, we can even remember before Light got caught by Nier, when they were setting up the meeting, Light didn't have to go to the meeting, but chose to. If he had not gone to the meeting, he would have been fine. But the fact that he went to the meeting should have meant that he was 100% sure that he was going to come out on top. And the flaws and dumb things left out that aren't consistent to showing Light's character almost just feel like they're giving Nier plot armor. Of course he's intelligent, however, I wouldn't say his win over Light really gives him a boost to his intelligence, because if anything he should have lost, which would have made sense. Nier was able to see how intelligent the second L was, who Light was at the time. But remember, if you're decently intelligent, and the fact that L had suspected Light before, you don't have to be as intelligent as the most smart person there is to suspect Light for being Kira, or you don't have to be smarter than him to suspect him as Kira. If you're decently intelligent, you'll consider this knowing that Light was suspected by L before, and noticing how smart Light is himself. Nier's actions were pretty good, like setting up the meeting on his terms, which didn't necessarily have to go through, but he did either way, gave it a try, and it worked. But we weren't shown enough about Nier to know how he would have reacted to things. Like, we saw how both Light and L reacted to Shinigamis being real, but since all the groundwork was already laid out, we didn't get to see these experiences with Nier and how Nier would think or react in these different situations. I think it says a lot about Nier's intelligence, the fact that he didn't even consider that Light or Mikami had an extra page of the Death Note, which they should have both had, not just Light. Because knowing he's Kira, why wouldn't he have an extra page? Nier's plan to replace all the pages of the Death Note was pretty smart and worked out, but it feels like this feat was more so just due to plot armor, because this is not something that would ever probably work in real life. What is Nier's IQ? Well, online I've seen it's estimated around maybe 190. This is not to say that his IQ is definitely 190, but that's just what I've seen about online. He was able to watch over Miyakami's actions and what he was doing, using him to his advantage. Of course this is smart, but this doesn't prove that he's smarter than Light, or as smart as L. L and Light would have done the same thing, or considered doing the same thing. When he came to the meeting with Light, he was wearing a mask on his face. Why'd he even feel the need? If he knew his plan was gonna work and it made sense to work, he would have felt no need because he would have won. The thing is though, he wasn't smart enough to properly beat Light, so he had to take precautions since him winning wasn't 100% for sure. And with the way things went, he should have lost. I think when it comes to how smart he is, he's the third smartest Death Note character, but he has to prove himself so much more. Light and L are right there at the top, and then he's third, but Light and L are much closer to each other than Nier is to them. From what we've seen of him, he hasn't proven himself that much from the position he started in. There hasn't been enough to see of his character to determine if he's even close to as smart as L. He was working with the entire SPK team, while Light was just working on his own. And still, it would have made sense for Light to win, and Nier didn't truly pull off a plan that had a for sure outcome of him winning. There was things he missed, great chance for him to lose. If we compare him to other Death Note characters like Mello or anyone else, he seems really smart because he's way smarter than the average person. But when compared with Light and L, like I mentioned before, he's definitely not as smart. We have to remember he is pretty young, so he could get smarter for sure. But saying he's close to as smart as L or Light would be wrong. Of course it's possible, but we would have to see more from his character to properly determine that for sure. He was a very good observer, observing the second L, who was Light, and observing Miyakami. You could even see that we saw how Nier was always solving puzzles, always thinking, keeping a ready mind, figuring things out. But until we possibly see more from his character, he stays as the third smartest Death Note character. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.